during Christmas dinner with my son and his wife. After 3 years of silence and too many nights spent alone, I got a text message that stopped me cold. Get up and go. Don't say anything. What followed? I never could have imagined it. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening from in the comments. It really helps us keep sharing stories like this one. Now let me take you back to how it started, because what happened that day still plays in my mind like it was yesterday. I was folding the embroidered tablecloth I'd used every Christmas since 1983 when my phone buzzed on the counter. It was a text from my son, Frederick. Mom, Carol, and I would love to have you over for Christmas dinner this year. Please say yes. I just stared at the screen. My hand stopped folding. It was the first time I'd heard from him in 3 years. The silence between us hadn't started over something small. After my husband, Warren, passed, I made the decision to sell our old lake cabin in Eagle River. I couldn't keep up with the property taxes or the maintenance. It was too much for me, emotionally and financially. But Frederick didn't see it that way. To him, I'd sold off part of our family's soul. He told me I'd done it behind his back, that I'd taken something from him. We hadn't spoken since. I remember the last thing he said to me. Guess that's it then. He didn't even wait for me to respond. Just walked out my front door. Since then, Christmas had been quiet. The first year, I made a small roast for myself and watched the snow fall from my recliner. The second year, I didn't even bother. I went to bed early with a cup of tea and the TV on low volume. So this message, it rattled me. I didn't know what to do, so I called my friend Pauline from church. Well, she said, do you want to be alone again this Christmas? Or do you want a seat at the table, even if it's a little awkward? I don't want to walk into a trap, I told her. Pauline didn't miss a beat. Then don't walk in blind. Go with your head up and your eyes open. I sat with her words for a bit. She always had a way of getting through the fog in my head. Finally, I replied to Frederick. I'd be honored. What time should I come? His response came quickly. Dinner's at 4. Carol's making your favorite roast. We're excited to see you. Your favorite roast. Those words tugged at me in a strange way. Carol had never asked me what my favorite anything was. Still, I said yes. I told myself it was time. I didn't want to worry about traffic or icy roads, so I scheduled an Uber to pick me up from my house in Kenosha that afternoon. I figured if things got weird, I could always leave the same way. I spent that morning getting ready. I pulled out my red wool coat, the one with the old-fashioned buttons I always liked. I dabbed on a little lipstick, brushed my curls, and made a green bean casserole in my Pyrex dish. I even brought a small gift bag of fudge I'd made the night before. Carol always said she liked chocolate. The Uber arrived at 2:15 sharp. A clean sedan, driven by a young man who looked surprised to see a woman my age riding that far on Christmas Day. I smiled and said, Winnetka, please. He nodded, asked if I was visiting family. I said, yes, it's been a while. The ride was about an hour, give or take. Snow covered the fields along the way, and the sky had that soft, gray stillness that only shows up during the holidays. I stared out the window most of the time, remembering old Christmases when Warren would play carols on the radio and Frederick would fall asleep in the back seat holding his stuffed rabbit. We pulled onto a quiet street lined with tall trees and brick homes that looked like magazine covers. The car slowed in front of a large house with a white wreath and garland wrapped around the porch columns. It didn't look like the kind of place my son would live in, not based on how things were the last time we talked. This the place? The driver asked. It is, I said, though I wasn't sure if I meant it. I stepped out, casserole in hand, and walked slowly toward the door. I pressed the bell, and the chime echoed inside. Carol answered, dressed in green and wearing a wide smile. Mildred, she said, as if we just had coffee together last week. Merry Christmas. Come in, come in. Frederick stood behind her, looking older but still my boy. His smile didn't quite reach his eyes. Hi, Mom, he said. It's good to see you. I stepped inside. The house smelled of roast beef and cinnamon, and something else I couldn't name. Candles flickered on the mantel. A fire crackled in the hearth. Everything looked beautiful, perfect. I handed Carol the casserole, and she took it like it was made of gold. You didn't have to, she said. I wanted to, I replied, but even as I said it, something felt off, like the warmth in the room had a chill underneath it. Still, I sat down, and I smiled, and I told myself this is what Christmas was supposed to be. I didn't know that before the night was over, I'd be running from that same house without saying a word. I stepped into the front hallway, and everything felt like it had been carefully placed, like a catalog page. The tree stood tall in the living room window, covered in white lights and shiny silver ornaments. The stockings hung in a row, one with my name stitched in red thread, brand new. Carol must have had it made, or maybe it was just for show. The house was bigger than I expected. Frederick grew up in a small two-bedroom with squeaky floors and mismatched chairs around the table. This house had tall ceilings, white walls, and polished wood floors that didn't dare creak. I noticed the rugs were perfectly centered under each piece of furniture. Not a pillow out of place. Carol took my coat and hung it in a closet that looked larger than my guest room back home. She smiled and offered me a glass of cider. Non-alcoholic, just how you like it, she said. That surprised me. I hadn't told her that. Maybe Frederick remembered. I nodded and took the glass, warm and heavy in my hand. Frederick motioned for me to sit on the couch. I followed, settling into a seat that was so firm it barely gave under my weight. Across from me sat a glass coffee table with exactly 3 magazines, fanned out neatly. There was no clutter, no books, no sign that anyone actually lived there. Frederick asked about my health, my garden, whether I still went to church every Sunday. He smiled a lot, but there was something behind his eyes that didn't sit right. Nervousness, maybe, or guilt, or both. Carol brought out a tray of small appetizers, cheese, crackers, and little shrimp skewers with a dipping sauce I didn't recognize. She sat beside me and asked how things had been in Kenosha, how I was managing the house on my own. I answered politely, but I couldn't shake the feeling that her questions had an edge to them, like they were looking for something more than conversation. Do you still handle the bills on your own? She asked, dabbing at the corner of her mouth with a cloth napkin. I do, I said. Still have my checkbook and my routines. I keep it simple. That's impressive, she said. Not everyone your age can manage that kind of thing. I smiled, but inside I felt like I was being measured. Carol turned her head slightly. Frederick's been talking about simplifying things for you, taking some of that burden off your shoulders. I looked at him. He quickly glanced down at his phone, pretending to read something, then set it face down on the coffee table. Well, I said slowly, I've always been pretty independent. Carol nodded. Of course. We just want you to have peace of mind. Something in the way she said it gave me pause. I looked back at the cider, still warm in my hands, but I hadn't taken a sip. Dina, the housekeeper, walked through the room carrying folded linens. She didn't look at any of us, just kept walking, her face calm, but her steps quick. She disappeared down a hallway without saying a word. The house felt big, but it didn't feel warm. We moved to the dining room just before 4. The table was set with china I didn't recognize, each plate exactly the same distance from the edge. Crystal glasses sat beside gold-trimmed napkins folded into perfect triangles. A small candle flickered in the middle of the table between 2 tall poinsettia arrangements. Carol pulled out a chair for me and smiled again. We're just so happy to have you here. It means a lot. Frederick poured wine for himself and Carol. We've missed you, Mom, he said. Really? I nodded and took my seat. The food was brought out in careful courses. Roasted root vegetables, glazed ham, potatoes with rosemary. Carol moved like a hostess from a television show, presenting each dish like she was being filmed. Everything tasted fine, but something was missing. Not in the food, in the air, in them. I noticed Carol watching me closely every time I picked up my fork. Frederick asked about the lake cabin again. His voice was calm, but there was a tightness in his jaw. Do you ever think about whether it was the right decision? He asked. I think about it all the time. I answered truthfully. But I did what I believed was right at the time. Carol reached across the table and placed her hand on mine. Her fingers were cold. We know. We just want to help now. However we can. I nodded, still unsure of what to say. Dinner went on, and conversation shifted to easier things. The weather. News about a cousin I hadn't seen in years. Carol asked more about my routine, what I do with my days, whether I'd ever thought about moving somewhere smaller. I kept my answers light. After dessert, Carol offered me another drink. She handed me a large glass of eggnog with a sprinkle of nutmeg on top. This one's special, she said. It's a family recipe. I brought it close to my lips, but the smell made me pause. It didn't smell like any eggnog I'd ever had. There was something underneath the spice. Faint but strange. I held it for a moment, pretending to sip, then set it down. Just then, my phone buzzed in my coat pocket. I'd almost forgotten it was there. I excused myself politely and walked down the hallway toward the entryway where the coat closet was. I reached into the pocket, pulled out the phone, and checked the screen. It was a text from a number I didn't recognize. Mildred, get up and leave. Don't say anything. Don't drink anything else. My hand went cold. The next few seconds stretched longer than I care to admit. I stared at those words like they were written in a foreign language. Then I read them again and again, but they didn't change. I looked back toward the dining room. I could still hear Carol's voice, cheerful and smooth, talking about making coffee. I looked down at my phone. Another message came in. Now, go. And that's when I knew I wasn't imagining things. Something wasn't right, and I had to make a choice. I stood there holding my phone, heart pounding harder than it should have. The message was still on the screen. No name, just that warning. Get up and leave. Don't say anything. Don't drink anything else. Then another. Now, go. I tucked the phone back in my coat pocket without replying. I didn't know what to think. Was it a mistake? Some scam? But my hands were shaking, and the air in that hallway suddenly felt heavy. I turned back toward the dining room slowly, trying not to let my mind spiral. I told myself I'd stay calm. Watch closely. Say as little as possible. When I stepped back in, Carol looked up with that same smooth smile. There you are, she said. Everything okay? I nodded, just checking a message from a neighbor. Nothing urgent. Good, she said quickly. We were just about to do coffee and dessert. Dina came in quietly, holding a tray with a glass pitcher of cream and a stack of small dessert plates. She moved gently, almost like she didn't want to make a sound. I noticed she didn't look anyone in the eye. Frederick shifted in his seat and stood up to help her. He took the plates and started placing them around the table while Carol disappeared into the kitchen to bring out the pie. Pumpkin spice cheesecake, she announced when she returned. Frederick's favorite. And yours too, right, Mildred? I smiled, but I didn't answer. She placed a large slice in front of me, along with that same tall glass of eggnog. I hadn't touched it since dinner started. and now it looked even more out of place. "Come on," she said with a playful tone. "You always had eggnog at Christmas. I made this batch special. It's tradition." Her eyes were locked on mine. That smile again, polite, warm, and something else behind it I couldn't name. I looked down at the drink. The nutmeg floated on top, just like it always did, but there was a strange film around the edge of the glass. Almost oily. I could smell the cinnamon, but underneath it, something faintly sharp. Bitter. I wrapped my hands around the glass, but didn't lift it. "Thank you," I said. "Looks delicious." Carol leaned forward. "A toast, then," she said, raising her own wine glass. Frederick followed suit. "To Mom," he said, eyes a little too bright. "To Christmas. To healing." Dina stood frozen in the corner of the room, watching quietly. When I glanced her way, she turned her gaze down and moved toward the kitchen again. We all lifted our glasses. I brought the eggnog to my lips, but didn't drink, just held it there and gave a small nod. Then I set it down. Carol took a slow sip of her wine. Frederick looked over at me, waiting. I reached for my fork and picked at the cheesecake. The taste was fine, but I wasn't really tasting anything at that point. My mind was stuck on the messages, the warning, the drink. Carol cleared her throat. "So, Mildred, have you made any changes to your financial planning since Warren passed?" I blinked. "Excuse me?" "Your finances," she said lightly. "I just mean, have you had help with investments, estate paperwork, things like that? A lot of folks don't realize how complicated it can get." Frederick was just saying he'd love to help you with all that. Frederick gave a quick nod, but didn't say anything. "I manage," I said. "It's not complicated. I keep things simple." Carol smiled again. "Of course. I just think you deserve a little rest. Let someone else take care of the hard stuff." Then she added, almost like an afterthought, "Have you ever looked into power of attorney?" I stared at her. "No, I haven't." She sipped her wine. "It's a good thing to have set up, just in case." Frederick looked down again, like he suddenly found his plate very interesting. "I'm still in good health," I said, more firmly this time. "Of course," she said quickly. "Just a safety net. You never know." Dina entered again to clear the plates. As she reached for mine, her eyes flicked to the eggnog, then back to me. Just a quick glance. But it said something. I watched her carry the dishes into the kitchen. Her shoulders were tight. She moved fast, but with care, like someone trying not to make noise. I stood from the table. "Excuse me," I said softly. "I need a moment." Carol looked surprised. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," I said. "Just need to freshen up." I made my way down the hallway, toward the front of the house again. My legs felt unsteady, and my palms were damp. I pulled out my phone. No new messages. I thought about calling 911, but what would I say? That the eggnog smelled funny? That my daughter-in-law asked too many questions? I stood near the coat closet, staring at the door. My purse was there. My coat. My keys were in the pocket. I took a breath and turned back toward the kitchen. I needed answers. Quiet ones. I walked past the dining room and into the kitchen. Dina stood at the sink, rinsing glasses. She didn't turn around. "Dina," I said softly. She paused, then looked over her shoulder. "Yes, ma'am." I lowered my voice. Was something added to my drink? She didn't answer right away. Her hands trembled slightly under the faucet. "I don't know for sure," she said finally, barely above a whisper. "But you shouldn't drink it." My chest tightened. "Why?" I asked. She shook her head. "Just trust me." I looked toward the back door. It had a small window leading out to a quiet backyard. Snow covered the patio furniture, untouched. I turned back to Dina. "I need to leave." Quietly. She nodded once. Your coat is where you left it. I'll keep them busy. I grabbed my things from the hallway, put on my coat fast, and slipped on my boots. I didn't stop to look back. Once I was outside, I called for another Uber, this time 1 block away. I didn't want the car pulling up right to the house. As I walked down the sidewalk, I felt the cold hit my face, sharp and clear. The air snapped me out of the fog I didn't know I'd been sinking into. The house behind me stayed quiet. No one came to the door. No one called out. I reached the corner and waited. The car pulled up just like it had hours before. I climbed into the back seat, heart still pounding. The driver looked back in the mirror, back to Kenosha. "No," I said, "just drive. I'll tell you where to go." And that's when I finally let myself believe it. Something was very wrong inside that house. The heat in the Uber was blasting, but I couldn't stop shivering. Not from the cold, from something else entirely. My thoughts were racing, my breath tight in my chest. I didn't know where I was heading, so I asked the driver to take me to a gas station a few miles away, somewhere open. I needed time to think. As we drove, I pulled out my phone again. That message was still there, bold and sharp. "Mildred, get up and leave. Don't say anything. Don't drink anything else." I read it over and over, trying to make sense of it. At first, I thought it was one of those scam texts. You know the kind, strange numbers, weird links pretending to be your bank or the IRS. But this didn't ask me to click anything. It didn't ask for money. It didn't even try to trick me. It was just a warning, plain and direct, and it used my name. Whoever sent this didn't say ma'am or dear or any of those formal greeting scammers always use. They said Mildred. And not just that, they knew I was there. They knew I had a drink in front of me that made the hairs on my arms stand up. I opened my contacts and checked the number. Nothing saved under it, just a random local number with an unfamiliar area code, North Shore area, maybe. No name, no photo, but not an 800 number. It was someone nearby. My stomach turned again. Was it Dina? I thought about how she looked at me when I stood up from the table, how she moved around Carol and Frederick like she didn't want to be noticed. Something about her had felt off too, but not in the same way. With her, it felt more like fear than guilt. Then another message came through. "They put something in your drink. You need to go. Now." I froze. Literally. My hands went still. I stared at those words like I was staring at a cliff with no railing. I hadn't touched the eggnog. Not one sip. But I'd held the glass. I'd brought it to my mouth. If I hadn't checked my phone, when I did, I blinked hard and looked out the window. We were passing rows of houses, all glowing with Christmas lights and wreaths. Everything looked normal, peaceful, festive. But inside me, nothing felt safe. The driver cleared his throat. "You sure about that gas station, ma'am? You okay?" "Yes," I said quickly. "Just need a place to stop and think. Somewhere public." He nodded and turned onto a side road. I tried to steady my breathing and looked back at my phone. My fingers hovered over the keypad. I didn't know what to say. I typed, "Who are you?" The little sending dot spun for a second, then stopped. No answer. I stared at the screen, waiting. 5 seconds. 10. Still nothing. I checked my signal. Full bars. Messages going through fine. I typed again. "How do you know what's happening?" Still nothing. I locked the screen and stared straight ahead. My throat felt tight, my chest heavy. I leaned back against the seat and closed my eyes for a second. My brain felt like it was trying to catch up to something that had already happened. "They put something in your drink." I kept repeating that in my mind, over and over. It didn't even feel real. Who would do that? And why? Frederick, my own son, the boy who used to fall asleep on my shoulder in church, who built me a crooked birdhouse in 3rd grade. Carol? She'd always been polite. Cold, yes. But poison? Then I thought about the way she'd pushed the drink, how she kept filling my glass, how she brought up my finances over and over as if it were casual. And then that question she'd asked about power of attorney. I didn't want to believe it, but deep down, something inside me already had. This wasn't just a misstep. This wasn't awkward family tension. This was planned. The car pulled into a brightly lit BP station. I thanked the driver and asked if he could wait. He said he didn't mind. Inside, I grabbed a coffee I didn't need and stood by the window, pretending to stir in sugar. My phone buzzed again. New message. Please trust me. I can't explain more now, but you were in danger. I typed back quickly. Why? What were they going to do? 3 dots appeared, then a pause. They were hoping to get you to sign documents. If you drank the whole glass, you would have felt confused, off balance. You'd be easier to control. My knees felt weak. I pulled out a nearby stool and sat down, ignoring the cashier watching me from behind the counter. Who are you? I typed again. The reply came slowly. Someone who heard too much. Someone who didn't want to stay quiet. That's when it hit me. It was someone inside the house. I looked out the window at the dark sky. My reflection looked back at me, tired and pale. I thought about going to the police, but I had nothing, just a few texts and a gut feeling. I thought about going back, but if they really were trying to manipulate me, walking back in would just give them another shot. Then I thought of Dina again. Quiet, watchful, scared. Could it have been her? Whoever it was, they'd warned me, and I believed them. I finished the coffee, stood up, walked back to the car. When I got in, I gave the driver a new address. Not my house, not Frederick's, but the downtown police station. I didn't have all the answers. I didn't know how deep it went, but I wasn't going to wait and find out the hard way. If someone had warned you with just one text, would you have listened? Would you have brushed it off like I almost did? Don't just sit there shaking your head. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and hit subscribe if you haven't. And if you still won't subscribe, please explain why in the comments. I gave the driver the address to the local police station and sat in the back seat with my coat still buttoned. I didn't say much. He didn't ask questions. I think he could tell something was off. As we drove through the quiet streets, my mind drifted back to something Warren once told me. It was years ago, maybe 20, right after someone we knew had been caught in a real estate scam. I remember we were sitting on our old porch swing after supper. He turned to me and said, "If something feels off, even just a little, pay attention. That's your gut talking. You don't always need proof to listen." That stuck with me. Over the years, I'd used that advice more than I realized. At work, in friendships, even with Frederick when he was a teenager. But that night, as I sat in that car, I realized just how important those words really were. Back at the house, before I left, I remember the way my hands had started to feel clammy. I thought it was just nerves, maybe the heat, but now I wasn't so sure. My skin had felt tight, like my face was warm, but my arms were cold. My vision was fine, but I felt unsteady, like I was swaying inside, even while standing still. I hadn't even drunk the eggnog, but maybe being around it or holding it, maybe that was enough to start something. I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't go back to that dining room. Instead of turning down the hall that led to the table, I turned the opposite way, toward the laundry room. I remembered passing it earlier when Carol gave me the quick tour. It had a back door that led out to the side of the house. I walked slowly, like I was just stretching my legs. My heart was pounding so loud, I was sure someone could hear it. When I stepped into the laundry room, Dina was there. She didn't flinch. She didn't say a word. But the moment she saw me, she reached into a cabinet, pulled out my purse, and handed it to me without speaking. Then she reached toward the hooks on the wall and grabbed my coat. She helped me slip it on like she'd done it 100 times before. Still no words, just a small nod. Her eyes said enough. She opened the side door, quiet as a whisper, and held it for me. I stepped out without looking back. The air hit me like a slap. Cold, sharp, honest. It woke something up in me. I walked fast, but not so fast that it looked suspicious. My goal was the sidewalk. Once I was there, I could pretend I was just out for a walk. No one would think twice. I didn't run. I didn't even glance back. I knew the second I did, I'd lose my nerve. So I kept my eyes forward and just walked, one step at a time. When I reached the end of the block, I turned the corner and pulled out my phone. My hands were shaking so bad, I could barely type. I opened the ride app and set the pickup point at a gas station about 5 minutes away. I needed to keep moving. As I waited, I stayed near a streetlight. I didn't want to be hidden in the dark. I figured if anything happened out here, I wanted to be seen. A car passed by slowly, but it wasn't my ride. Just someone heading home from dinner, probably full of pie and stories. I wondered if they knew how lucky they were. Another message came through. You did the right thing. Don't go back. Ever. I typed back. Was it Carol? Or Frederick? No answer. That silence told me everything. The Uber arrived, and I climbed in. The driver looked back. Where to? I hesitated for just a second. Downtown police station. I said, please don't stop until we get there. He nodded. You got it. We drove in silence for a while. I looked out the window at all the houses with lights glowing in their windows, children laughing, TVs flashing behind curtains. The world looked normal, but I knew better now. I thought about Frederick. I'd raised him, sat with him during fevers, helped him with school projects, held him when his dog died. I thought I knew him, but people change. Sometimes when you're not looking. I thought about Carol. Polite, polished, always in control. I used to think she just didn't know how to connect. But now I wasn't sure if that was the truth or just the mask she wore. And then I thought about Dina. Quiet, steady, working behind the scenes. She could have stayed out of it. She could have looked the other way. But she didn't. She saw something and chose to act. That mattered. When we pulled into the police station parking lot, I thanked the driver and stepped out. The building was mostly quiet, just a few cars in the lot. I walked through the glass doors and up to the desk. A young officer looked up. Can I help you? I took a deep breath. Yes, I said. I think someone tried to drug me, and I think it was my own family. The officer at the desk handed me a clipboard with a form. Take your time, he said gently. Let me know if you need help filling anything out. I sat down on one of the hard plastic chairs along the wall. The room smelled like floor wax and old coffee. It was quiet except for the soft hum of a vending machine and the buzz of the overhead lights. Before I picked up the pen, I pulled out my phone. I stared at the message again. You did the right thing. Don't go back. Ever. Then I did something I wasn't sure I'd regret or not. I dialed the number. It rang twice. Then a woman answered. She didn't say hello, just, I didn't think you'd call. Her voice was calm, maybe mid-40s, maybe younger. Hard to tell. Not familiar. Who is this? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Why are you warning me? You don't know me, she said, but I was in the house. I overheard things you needed to know. I sat back in the chair and pressed the phone tighter to my ear. You were there tonight? Yes, I help Carol with paperwork, sometimes. Fill in work. My aunt is the housekeeper. Dina, she didn't want me getting involved, but I couldn't ignore it. I didn't say anything. I just listened. They planned for you to sign something tonight. Power of attorney paperwork. Some financial transfers. They were going to tell you it was just for peace of mind, to help manage bills. But it wasn't. I swallowed hard. How do you know all that? I heard them. In the kitchen. 2 days ago. Carol said she'd been reading up on cognitive decline and how easy it was to get guardianship if the person seems confused or unstable. She said your recent doctor visit could help support it. My stomach turned. That visit had nothing to do with confusion. I'd gone in because I'd been feeling dizzy on and off. Stress, the doctor said. Dehydration. Nothing serious. Carol said if you hesitated, they'd just say it was temporary, that you were just signing papers, so they could help out for a while. But once they had access, they'd move fast. Accounts, property, everything. The words settled in slowly, heavy, and sharp. Frederick didn't stop her. I asked. There was a long pause. He didn't come up with the idea, but he didn't stop it either. He seemed uncomfortable, but he also seemed desperate, like he needed this to work. I looked at the paperwork in my lap, then up at the officer behind the glass. He wasn't watching me, just working on a computer, probably assuming I was filling out my report. Why did you send the messages? I asked her. Because you looked kind, she said. Because my aunt said you treated her better in 2 hours than they had in 2 years. And because you didn't deserve what they were planning. I let that sit between us for a few seconds. Thank you, I said. You shouldn't thank me, she replied. Just be careful. They're going to realize soon that you're not coming back. I don't know how they'll react. I nodded slowly, even though she couldn't see me. Do you know what was in the eggnog? I asked. No, but Carol had it delivered from a specialty shop in Chicago. She said she asked for something strong enough to take the edge off, whatever that means. I gripped the phone tighter. It smelled bitter. I believe it, she said. She was excited for you to drink it. I've never seen her that focused on anything. My eyes burned, but I refused to cry in a police station. Not over this. Not now. I should go, she said. You're safe now. That's what matters. Wait, I said. What's your name? She paused. It's better if I don't say. For now. Before I could respond, she hung up. I stared at the phone in my hand, then at the clipboard in my lap. I filled out the form slowly, writing down everything I could remember. I left nothing out. The officer at the front desk read it over carefully, then nodded. You did the right thing, he said. We're going to follow up. Can I give you that number? I asked. The one that warned me? Absolutely. He took it and copied it down, then told me an officer would be reaching out to schedule a full interview. It was almost 10 p.m. by the time I left the station. The parking lot was quiet. My Uber driver had gone, so I called another. While I waited, I sat on the front steps and looked up at the dark sky. The wind had picked up. I pulled my coat tighter around me. I thought about all the things I hadn't said at dinner. How I'd wanted so badly to believe it was just a regular Christmas. That maybe we could finally put things behind us. But that's not what happened. Instead, I was sitting alone at a police station, trying to figure out how my own son could be part of something like this. The car pulled up. I got in and gave the driver my address. On the way home, I didn't say much. I just watched the houses pass by. Lights still twinkling. Wreaths still hanging. Families probably still finishing dessert and laughing at old stories. But my story had changed, and I wasn't sure what came next. I did everything right, and they still tried to take it all. If you've ever had to defend yourself from your own family or felt betrayed by someone you raised, Press the like button now. Subscribe, so these kinds of stories don't get buried. And if you don't believe this could happen to you or still don't want to subscribe, say so in the comments. Let the rest of us hear your reason. I didn't go straight home that night. Instead, I asked the driver to take me to a diner I remembered seeing from the highway on the way in. One of those 24-hour places with neon signs and strong coffee. I needed time to think. I needed to be somewhere public until I knew what to do next. The diner was quiet, just a couple of truckers in the corner and a waitress wiping down tables. I sat at the far end of the room, near a window, and ordered a cup of black coffee. I didn't drink it right away. I just sat there, hands around the mug, trying to steady myself. That's when my phone buzzed again. "Are you safe?" the message read. I replied right away, "Yes, I'm at a diner off the highway." I talked to the police. The typing dots showed up, then stopped, then started again. Finally, another message came through. "I'm Carol's cousin. I only came to help with end-of-year paperwork." I wasn't supposed to stay long, but I overheard them talking, and I couldn't unhear it. I froze, reading it twice. I replied, "So it was real? Everything? All of it?" They said once you signed the documents, they'd move money around fast. Carol kept bringing up a medical note, said your recent doctor visit could be used to claim cognitive decline if needed. She printed power of attorney forms herself. I sat back against the booth. It wasn't just a plan. It was detailed. It was ready. And they had every intention of going through with it. I typed slowly. "Why help me?" Her reply came quick. "Because it's wrong. And because my Aunt Dina said you were kind to her. You noticed her. That doesn't happen often in that house." I swallowed hard. She added, "I saved copies of the documents Carol was working on. I made a backup of the email where she asked her friend to get something strong to help you relax. I can send it to the police if they contact me. I'm scared, but I'll cooperate." That's when I knew what I had to do. I pulled out the card the officer had given me earlier and dialed the number. "Winnetka Police. How can I help you?" I gave my name and explained everything, slowly, clearly sticking to the facts. I told them about the eggnog, the documents, the texts, the woman I was messaging now. I told them I hadn't signed anything, hadn't taken a sip, but I believed they fully intended for me to do both. The dispatcher didn't question it. "Ma'am, I need you to stay exactly where you are. Officers are already heading to the address you gave us earlier. Please don't go home yet. You could be called to give more information." I agreed and gave her the name of the diner. Then I hung up and exhaled. It was the first real breath I'd taken all night. The waitress came by to refill my coffee. She glanced at my face and softened. "You okay, hon?" "I will be," I said. "Just a long day." She nodded. "Christmas'll do that to you." I sipped the coffee slowly this time. It wasn't good, but it was hot. I watched the snowfall outside and thought about how quickly everything had changed. Just that morning, I'd been hopeful. Nervous, but hopeful. I thought maybe time had healed some things. Maybe love would fill in the cracks. Instead, I was sitting alone in a diner, grateful I hadn't ended up unconscious with a pen in my hand. I messaged the cousin again. "Thank you. I gave your number to the police. They may call." "I understand. I'll tell the truth." I paused, then typed one more thing. "What's your name?" "Mira." That was it. No last name. Just Mira. The officers didn't take long. About 25 minutes later, I saw the reflection of red and blue lights outside the diner. One squad car stayed in the lot while another passed by and turned onto the road toward Frederick's neighborhood. Not long after, my phone rang again. "Mrs. Petite," the voice said. "This is Officer Franklin with the Winnetka Police. I understand you made a report earlier tonight. We're following up. I stood and moved to the back of the diner for privacy. Yes, I'm still here. I didn't go home like you said. He asked me a few questions, asked me to confirm the messages, the documents I'd heard about, the drink. I told him what Mira had said and how she claimed to have digital copies. We're at the residence now, he said. The housekeeper let us in. No resistance so far. Your son and daughter-in-law are both here. I said nothing. Ma'am, he continued. Do you know if they had any legal authority to access your financial accounts? Any signed agreements? No, I said firmly. Nothing. He thanked me and said someone would be in touch soon to gather a formal statement. He asked me to stay available by phone and avoid any direct contact with them for now. I agreed. Then I returned to my booth, sat down, and stared out the window. The snowfall had slowed, and the parking lot was empty again. The silence in that moment felt heavy, but not lonely, just real. It wasn't the Christmas I had planned, but I wasn't going to be tricked, and I wasn't going to stay silent. For the first time in years, I felt more clear-headed than I had in a long while. My heart hurt, yes, but my mind was steady. They had tried to take advantage of my age, of my grief, of my trust, but they failed. And now the truth was in motion. About an hour after speaking with Officer Franklin, I got another call. They asked me to come back to the house, under police escort. They said I wouldn't be alone. They needed me to confirm some documents they'd found. I hesitated, but I agreed. I knew if I didn't face it now, it'd haunt me later. They sent a patrol car to the diner. The officer was kind and kept things quiet. As we drove, I stared out the window, watching the snow gather on the sidewalks. The neighborhood came into view again. Those big houses lined up in a row, lit up with twinkling lights and candles in the windows. But everything felt different this time, like the shine had worn off. When we pulled up, 2 squad cars were already in the driveway. The lights weren't flashing anymore, but the presence was clear. This wasn't a friendly check-in. Frederick's front door stood wide open. Officers stood just inside. I took a deep breath and stepped out of the car. As I walked up the steps, I saw Carol sitting on the bottom stair, her arms folded across her chest, eyes red. She looked at me, then quickly looked away. Frederick stood near the dining room, head down, hands in his pockets. His shoulders looked heavy, like he'd aged 10 years since I last saw him. Mrs. Petite. Officer Franklin greeted me, holding a folder. Thanks for coming. We'd like you to take a look at these documents. We believe they were printed and prepared for your signature tonight. He handed me a few pages clipped together. I read them slowly, carefully. The top document was a general durable power of attorney form. My name was typed in clean print across the top. It stated that I, Mildred Petite, was appointing Frederick E. Petite and Carol S. Petite as my legal agents, granting them full authority over my financial affairs and property, effective immediately. Below that was a line for my signature. It had already been dated December 25th. I flipped to the next page, a form authorizing them to access and move funds from accounts held in my name. Another blank signature line, already dated. The third page was a draft of a handwritten letter, printed from a Word document. It said I had requested this arrangement due to increasing confusion and difficulties managing my own affairs, citing a recent decline in mental clarity following medical visits. I stared at that last part. I hadn't said that. I hadn't written anything like it. I hadn't authorized any of it. They printed this without your knowledge. Officer Franklin asked. Yes, I said clearly. I've never seen any of this before. He nodded and signaled to another officer, who took the documents and bagged them carefully. I looked over at Frederick. His face was pale. He wouldn't meet my eyes. Was this your idea? I asked him quietly. He shook his head slowly. It started as Carol's. She kept saying you needed help, that we could step in before things got worse. I raised my eyebrows. Worse. You've been alone, Mom, he said, finally looking at me. You canceled holidays. You sold the cabin without warning. You've been off. I've been grieving, I said. I've been managing, and I've never asked you for help. He didn't answer that. Carol finally stood up from the steps, her voice tight. We were trying to protect you, she said. You don't see it, but you've changed. You forget things. You get confused. I turned to her. I forgot a birthday card once. That doesn't mean I'm losing my mind. Carol stepped closer. You don't understand the pressure we're under. Student loans, the house, trying to keep things together. We weren't going to steal anything. We were just going to help. I stared at her. Help doesn't come in the form of forged documents and drugged eggnog. Her face fell. That's when Dina walked into the room, led by another officer. She looked at me and gave a small nod, just like she had earlier that night. Calm. Steady. Mrs. Petite, the officer said. Dina has shared that she overheard conversations between Mr. and Mrs. Petite earlier this week. Would you like to hear her account? Yes, I said. Dina looked nervous, but she spoke clearly. I was folding laundry on Tuesday when I heard them talking in the office. The door was cracked. Carol was telling Frederick that she'd found a lawyer online who could help process power of attorney without going through court. She said all they needed was a signature. Frederick shifted. She said they could say Mrs. Petite was confused, maybe forgetful. Carol said they'd use her recent clinic visit as proof if needed. Dina looked at me. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to lose my job. But when you showed up and treated me like a person, I couldn't stay quiet. I felt my throat tighten. You did the right thing. Thank you. Officer Franklin nodded. We'll be including her statement in the official report. Carol's voice cracked. It wasn't supposed to go this far. We just needed a little help. You don't drug someone for help, I said, my voice calm but firm. You talk to them. You ask. You don't lie. Frederick didn't say anything. The officer spoke again. At this time, you're not being arrested, but this is now an active investigation. Depending on further evidence and statements, charges may be filed. I stood there, taking it all in. The lies, the betrayal, the way my own family had planned to take everything Warren and I had worked for. A lifetime of savings. My home. My dignity. Frederick looked up. Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't know it would come to this. You always had a choice, I said quietly. You made the wrong one. The officers started collecting everything. Myra's digital documents, Dina's written statement, the drink sample from the kitchen. It was clear the story wasn't over yet, but the pretending was. For the first time that night, I felt completely awake. The officers stayed behind to finish their work, but by the time I left that house, the mood had shifted completely. Carol was placed in handcuffs and led out to a squad car. Frederick wasn't arrested. Not yet, but they told him he was under official investigation and advised him not to leave town. He didn't say a word as I walked past him. He didn't even look at me. The same boy who used to beg me for one more bedtime story now stood with his back against the wall like a stranger. I didn't feel angry in that moment, just tired. One of the officers offered to take me home. I accepted. The ride back to Kenosha was quiet. No small talk, no distractions. I sat in the back seat with my hands folded in my lap, the folder of documents resting beside me. Everything I had worked for, my name, my life's earnings, my peace, almost taken with a glass of eggnog and a few forged forms. When we pulled into my driveway, I thanked the officer and stepped out into the cold. My porch light was still on, and the snow on the walkway was untouched. My house looked exactly how I left it, but somehow it felt different now. Safer. I walked inside, turned on the entry light, and shut the door gently behind me. The air smelled like cinnamon from the candle I'd left burning earlier. I set the folder down on the table, hung up my coat, and sat for a moment on the edge of the couch. I didn't cry. I just sat there, letting the stillness settle in. Eventually, I made my way upstairs and changed into my nightgown. I brushed my teeth, washed my face, and turned down the bed just like always. But sleep didn't come easy. My thoughts kept going back to that table, to Carol's face, to Frederick's silence, to Dina's courage. The whole night played over in loops. When I finally did fall asleep, it wasn't for long. I woke the next morning just after 6. The sun hadn't come up yet. My house was quiet, still blanketed in snow. I put on my robe and made my way downstairs. The heater kicked on, humming through the floor vents. I filled the kettle and started a pot of coffee. The same routine I'd followed for years, but this time it brought comfort. No pressure, no pretending, just me, my kitchen, and a fresh start. I poured my coffee and sat at the table with one hand wrapped around the mug. That's when I noticed the small ceramic angel sitting on the windowsill. Carol had made it back in middle school, one of those art class projects where the paint always looked a bit smudged. She'd given it to me that Christmas years ago before she ever married Frederick. I stared at it for a long time. It was chipped along the wing. I'd always kept it anyway. Now it meant something else. A reminder that even the people who smile the most can carry secrets. My phone buzzed. A new number. I answered it. Mrs. Petite, the voice asked. Yes, it's me, Mira. I just wanted to make sure you were okay. I closed my eyes for a second and nodded. I'm all right. I'm home. I spoke to the officers, she continued. I gave them the emails, the files, everything I copied. I hope it helps. It does, I said. It does more than you know. She hesitated, then said, I quit. I told Dina I can't keep working around people like that. I don't blame you. Silence hung between us for a moment, and then I found myself saying something I hadn't planned. Do you have anything else lined up? She laughed a little. No, not yet. I'm just hoping something turns up. Well, I said, our church runs a small community kitchen 3 days a week. We're always short on help, especially with our seniors. I think you'd be good there. Honest work, good people. We can pay something small, and I can help you get on your feet while you figure out what's next. She didn't speak right away. I could hear her trying to catch her breath. You don't have to do that, she said. I know, I replied. But I want to, because you did something most people wouldn't. You warned me. She sniffled softly. Okay, she whispered. Yes, I'd like that. We exchanged a few more details, and I told her I'd see her Monday morning. After we hung up, I felt a little bit lighter. That Christmas morning wasn't filled with music or gifts or family traditions, but it was filled with something else, truth, clarity, and a strange kind of peace. I stood at the fridge and took down a few photos, ones I wasn't ready to look at anymore. Frederick as a boy, Carol holding a birthday cake. I didn't throw them away. I just tucked them into a drawer. Some things still matter, even when they're painful, but they don't need to be front and center. I left one photo on the fridge door. It was of Warren and me on our 40th anniversary, standing in front of the lake cabin before we sold it. He was holding my hand, and I remember we'd just finished laughing at something silly. He said, I looked at that picture and smiled. He told me once, getting older isn't the hard part. It's watching people you love forget what matters. He was right. They say Christmas is about family. But what happens when your family sees you as a bank account, not a mother? Would you know what to do? Would you recognize the signs before it's too late? I almost didn't. And I still don't know what'll happen with Frederick. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. But I know now that love doesn't mean ignoring your instincts. And trust should never be given away blindly, no matter who's asking. If you've ever ignored your gut around someone you trusted, or felt something was off but stayed anyway, tell me in the comments. Would you have stayed at that dinner table? I'm listening. And before you go, please like this video, share it with someone you care about, and make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next story. Because sometimes the ones we love the most are the ones we have to see most clearly. Thank you for watching.